I'm delighted to introduce friend and colleague, our first session, Building a Sustainable Dam with Theresa Regli, Director and Chief Strategist of Vox Veritas Digital. Theresa, thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. It's wonderful to see you. As mentioned, Tracy and I are colleagues and friends. We've known each other probably 20 years, I guess, since I started working at DAM. And I always remember Tracy as being one of the first real women leaders I met in this industry. So it's really great to have her here and sharing this conference today and to be the first speaker. So thank you very much, Tracy.
Awesome. Thank you, Theresa.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled to be here today, and hello everybody out there. Always a little bit challenging to not be able to see the audience, but I know I see there's a lot of you up there as the number grows. I'm talking about a new topic today, which I think is exciting. Even though I've been talking about DAM for 20 plus years, I've never given a conference keynote about sustainability, and I think it's somewhat appropriate that I'm going to talk about sustainability at a virtual conference, of course, because none of us had to travel to be here. This is a lower carbon impact event. And many of you might be thinking, well, why are we talking about DAM and sustainability, right? We work in a digital industry. We're not making cement. We're not making plastic products. We're generally pretty sustainable, we might say. Because we're DAM practitioners who work in the digital world. But frankly, I've learned otherwise over my last year since I started focusing on sustainability. So today I'm going to talk about intersections of DAM and sustainability and why does it really matter? A lot of you probably know what these are. These are solar panels, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the different energy things that affect our industry, some of the business practices that affect our industry, and of course, who we buy from and what kind of carbon impact does that have. So as mentioned, I'm Theresa Regli. I run a small consultancy firm out of London called Vox Veritas Digital, and I've been working in DAM now for over 20 years, and I've worked more broadly in digital technology now for, believe it or not, over 30 years. I started building websites in 1994, and it's been a very interesting and quite a long road. I do a few things with my business, which is primarily working in sort of media software or DAM market intelligence. I like to use the word media because it's sort of all forms of media, video, digital assets as we more traditionally think of them. I do content technology strategy, so more broadly than DAM, if companies are looking at things like PIMS or just generally marketing technologies. And I also work on data plans and data orchestration. So I wrote a book about DAM back in 2016, so 8 years ago, and it still holds up pretty well. It's still mostly true in terms of the modern state of DAM. I would say the main thing that's changed since I wrote the book is that we've largely moved from on-premise installations of DAM to the cloud, which is part of what, of course, has had quite a bit of effect on the environment. And this is, if I ever do update the book, would be a big part of it, is how we've moved from on-premise to the cloud. But this book really helped me catapult my own business, which I started 8 years ago. And these are some of the clients that I've had just over the last 3 to 4 years that I work with largely to help them get digital asset management systems set up and an overall content strategy. I also teach part-time at King's College London, where I help students get real-world experience with DAM systems and run sort of real-world projects for them so that they can go into the world and work in DAM. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to take a poll first, just to set the stage here. How many of you take pictures of your food? Obviously, mostly with your phone, I imagine. So let's get that poll up there. And if you could just click when the poll comes up, it should be here in just a few seconds. Because I used to take a lot of pictures of my food for a really, really long time. I'm hoping that the poll's going to come up. I'm not seeing the poll. Do we have a poll? There it is, polls. Do we see the poll? Excellent. Oh, no, that's the wrong poll. Wait, are we seeing the poll? I'm not seeing the poll. Can anyone tell me if they can see the poll? Maybe someone could put in the chat. You see the poll? Ellie? Do we see the poll?
Hi, Theresa. Yeah, if you wanted to just click on polls, you should be able to see the results come through.
Oh, great. Thank you for that.
No
Polls.
worries.
There it is. Okay. Thank you, Ellie, for your help. Technology. So 44% taking pictures of your food, 50. Okay, so we got, it's going down a little bit. People are saying no. Keep clicking. Do you take pictures of your food? Okay, so we've got about 45, 55. So about 45% of you take pictures of your food. Now, I'm sure those of you who don't take pictures of your food, you might take pictures of other things. Maybe you like to take pictures of trees. Maybe you take lots and lots of pictures of your kids. That's very common, right? People take a lot. That's more important, taking pictures of your kids than taking pictures of your food. But let me tell you, I used to take so many pictures of my food, and I realized that, Facebook, which especially when Facebook was new, I used to constantly take pictures of my food. I decided that this was what I was going to just chronicle and journal on Facebook for many years, and probably for a period of about 5 or 6 years, that was all I posted, was pictures of food. And I decided, as I was preparing this presentation, where did I have a ridiculous sort of volume of images and data? And I thought, it's all the pictures of food that I took and I posted to Facebook from probably 2006 until about 2015. So, I know that on the 5th of November, 2011, that I bought a whole bunch of baguettes when I was in Paris. And I know that on the 6th of November, I made a poached pear with chocolate on top, and I was feeling a bit sluggish and I ate snails. And look at all these pictures of my food. I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, I can go back through Google Photos, and I can even find pictures from my old, like, pre-iPhone Nokia phone when cameras were like a new and hot thing, on phones. So that's how far back my pictures of food go. So 45% of you pretty much do the same thing, right? You take pictures of your food. Now, why should this matter? This matters because this is a very mundane, everyday example of our carbon footprint. Now, you might think carbon footprint is like, well, I fly, that's my carbon footprint, or I get in the car, that's my carbon footprint. But the reality is we have an amazing digital carbon footprint, and it is exponentially rising. So 5 billion people in the world have access to the internet, and every single search query, every single stream video, every type of cloud computing, and of course the data centers that support our MAM and DAM systems are responsible for the ever-increasing global demand for energy. Okay, and this is really what it boils down to, right? It's the fact that we take the picture, but then we store the picture, and these pictures go back now, for us personally, even 20 plus years, and that creates carbon emissions. Now, a large part of our digital footprint today is actually caused by video streaming and very, very large sizes of videos, and this is where the light bulb really goes on. Now, studies now estimate that digital emissions, historically in the last couple of years, have been between 2.3 and 3.7% of global emissions. Now, believe it or not, that is pretty much equivalent to the entire aviation industry. So we're all worried about flying, or we're all worried about turning off everything when we walk out of the house, but how many of you actually turn off your computer, or how many of you just kind of leave the television on with streaming Netflix while you're doing something else when you're not really paying attention to it? So when we think about it, it's really getting intense, and it's getting more intense. Why? Well, pretty obviously because of AI. AI is causing an exponentially larger compounding of energy use. And of course, Gen AI isn't just the processing, it's also generating even more content, right, that we have to store. So this is huge. Okay, and here's a worst, best, and a sort of a middle case scenario for what's expected of data centers going forward. So we're in a situation where in the worst case scenario, if we don't sort of do something about it and manage our data better and more efficiently, look at this. I mean, it's really, really huge. And data centers even today are using more energy than entire countries. I mean, how crazy is that, right? So when we think about even countries like Egypt, South Africa, global data centers are already using more energy than these countries, and almost as much as countries like the UK, which has a very large population and uses a lot of energy because it's a modern, an extremely modern society. So this is really intense, and so this digital carbon footprint is also part of what we're creating through DAM. Now, as I mentioned, we think about a lot of things as our carbon imprint, like you get on a plane or whatever it is. But if you look at something like going on a Zoom call for an hour, 50 grams of CO2, right? You could leave your light on for a year, and it has far less carbon impact than a Zoom call. Bet you didn't think of that, right? I know I didn't. So these sorts of things are really much bigger carbon impact than you would imagine, or that most people would imagine. Leaving your plasma TV on, also extremely high carbon impact, 237, versus even sending and writing a long email. And we send emails constantly that just say thank you, and then they have this massive string of text below because it's the entire thread. These things actually create quite a bit of carbon impact. So I think we've stated the problem, right? We're creating a digital carbon impact, and it's got as big, if not an increasingly almost bigger impact than the airplane industry or the aviation industry. And this is a picture I took in Gatwick Airport one day. I forget where I was going, but I took a picture of this elephant because, they said it's the elephant in the airport, and I would say it's now become the elephant of the digital world. It's definitely changed and come up, it's sort of changed the game, and it's come up a lot more in conversation since AI. So I'm sure you're familiar with sustainability. Sustainability is a very vast topic. It includes social factors, includes economic factors. But today, based on the digital carbon footprint challenge that I've laid out there, we're specifically going to talk about environmental sustainability. And this, if you need a definition, I'm sure many of you probably don't, is really about the ability to maintain an ecological balance, right, in our planet's natural environment, and being able to conserve natural resources to support the well-being of current and future generations. And we all know that this is massively at risk. And I won't talk about all the other reasons why that is, but it's massively at risk. And even just today, there was an article in the Financial Times about how Coca-Cola has backpedaled from their commitment to produce less plastic. Right. So they had said they were going to use at least half of all the material that they use to create their products. They were going to reduce. They were going to use 50% recycled materials, but now they've reduced it to 25%. Right. So the biggest corporations in the world are constantly making promises that they end up backing off of. So specifically with the environmental impact, we need to think about what are we doing as dam professionals that can help the environment. And it might be small compared to Coca-Cola creating their billions of plastic bottles every year, but it is still something that we all should be thinking about. Now, dam systems use a lot of energy, believe it or not. This is my standard dam graphic. Like, what does a dam do? But in this case, I've sort of taken it and I've looked at it through a different lens, which is, well, how does it use energy? Of course, we create files. The sizes of files are getting bigger. I mean, I had a client that I worked with 7 years ago to install a dam system, and now they're moving to a new one and they're installing a new one. And when I worked with them 5 years ago or 7 years ago, they were doing 2K video, right? And then they were doing 4K. Now they're doing 8K, right? So you think about the size of these videos, they're getting bigger. So that's more storage, more data centers, more metadata also equals more storage. There are often hundreds of versions of these files, and no one ever wants to delete any of them. File transformation takes a ton of energy, because if we take a high resolution file and we modify it, we transform it for different channels, there's constant processing going on. And of course, even APIs that are constantly having these conversations. One of the most interesting things I learned as I was preparing this presentation and doing my research was I spoke with Anne Gretland, who's the CEO of PhotoWare. It's a dam vendor that's been around for a very long time. And she was even talking about how her team did an analysis of what code bases have the highest carbon impact versus the least amount of carbon impact. So the carbon efficiency of code even comes into play. So when you're complaining about, boy, that navigation really takes a long time to load or render, or my breadcrumb trail takes a really long time to navigate through, or I click on it, takes a long time to render those results, a lot of that is because, frankly, the code is not efficient, right? Or it's not actually a good index. It's not able to process quickly enough, right? And that expends more energy. So it's interesting even to have dam vendors thinking this way about their code bases. It's really good. It needs to be more efficient. And then content delivery networks. These are also, in this sort of window between the dam system here on the left and the channels. There's often a CDN that's hosting and streaming. Those also take up a lot of energy. So all of these contribute to the carbon impact. And you've probably, I'm guessing, never had a discussion about, how can we actually make this more efficient? Do we need to store 999 versions of this file going all the way back? Or can we think of a more efficient way? Can we actually delete, beyond a certain date if no one has used it, things like that? So we need to start having these conversations. Now, one thing that's really exciting, and this has now come up with 3 of my clients in the last 18 months, and I'm really excited about that, is they have asked me to make sustainability part of their business case for DAM. And I'm sure all of you have had different challenges and struggles with business cases and developing business cases and getting money for your DAM systems. But, did you actually think that sustainability could be used as part of your business case? So thinking about, if you actually centralize your files, if you reduce and eliminate your file duplication, and these are things we've been saying for the last 2 decades about DAM, it actually reduces your carbon impact, right? So if you have, as a company, if you're working on a net zero strategy or you have a carbon reduction strategy, and I know many, many companies do now, and now that I work on them, I'm seeing more and more of this. If you think about DAM as a way to reduce your carbon impact by having more efficient storage, by having better search that reduces computational power and energy use, fostering reuse, you're not duplicating, you're not creating more files, you're creating remote collaboration environments so that people don't have to travel as much. This is all reducing your carbon imprint. Now, if you're looking to get more people to rally around your cause for DAM, you should definitely think about, do you have a head of corporate sustainability, or do you have someone in your HR department or your people team who is focused on this? Because you can get another person, rallying for your cause if you're doing a DAM business case or as a DAM manager, is that it can actually be used in this frame as a piece of the sustainability argument. Now, I think there's all kinds of, when it comes to media and it comes to entertainment and all the media that we create, there's a lot of new foundations for doing things better. And this gets me really excited and really happy. And I'm going to use Coldplay as an example for what they're doing with their tour. So you can imagine they have carbon impact, to a huge degree, not just because they're a band on tour, but of course they create a lot of media for their tour. They have huge devices that stream live concerts, on the stage. Now, I didn't actually go see them myself. I like Coldplay. I'm not the biggest fan, so I didn't go see them. But this was highlighted to me by Christopher Grekel, who's the CEO of ICP, which is a DAM services firm. And they work a lot with media and entertainment companies that specifically are storing and generating, of course, some of the biggest files that are out there on the internet today. Now, what Coldplay did that was really kind of amazing was they made a commitment to massively reduce their emissions, and they actually worked with climate scientists to make sure that they held up their promises, which I think very few corporations do. They make the promises, but then they don't necessarily follow through on it. And they also got their fans involved. And this was really cool because they put these bicycles sort of in the middle of the floor of the concert. And if you wanted to help power the concert and generate energy for the concert, you could get a spot on the bike, right? So you'd get on the bike and you'd pedal, and that would help generate the power for the show. So they didn't have to they didn't have to use as much power, which is awesome, right? And on their website, they have all of the carbon offsets that they also invested in. So they planted trees in order to, if you're not familiar with carbon offsets, it's when you make a financial commitment to do something that actually will take carbon, out of the atmosphere or offset the emissions that you're creating. So, for example, planting a tree. They show how they reduce their emissions in various ways. They contributed to some ocean cleanup projects and all of these really awesome things that they did. They partnered with green travel providers, and they used electric vehicles and all this great stuff. So this is becoming more of a norm in society rather than an exception, which I think is good in terms of the mentality, not necessarily in terms of the action. But the awareness is there, and the corporate awareness is there. And I think it needs to be even more embedded in our information technology practices and in our DAM practices, not just in terms of thinking about travel and all of these sorts of pieces that are on this list. So I thought about the DAM market, and as an analyst in this space for a really long time, I said to myself, well, who's sort of the top, who actually, what dam vendors are actually talking about sustainability and actually thinking about how dam impacts the environment, and are they doing things to help the environment. And so I talked to a lot of dam vendors as part of this research, and I'm giving PhotoWare the gold star. As I mentioned earlier, I spoke to Anne Gretland a few weeks ago, and they have a tremendous amount of information on their website, not only around dam as a business case, but also what they have done as a company is quite tremendous. Now, they're a Norwegian company, and of course, when we think about environmentalism and sustainability, you got to put the Scandinavians at the top, the top of the list in terms of what they do for the environment and how they minimize their carbon impact. But they have gone through a lot of certification processes that are time consuming and required investment. And even in their offices, they did a whole bunch of things with their lighting, all sorts of things to really reduce their carbon impact as a company. But then, as I mentioned, we also had a conversation about code. So thinking about dam vendors and their products and making sure that they are modernized, that they don't have a lot of technical debt, and that the code is more efficient. Because if you have an inefficient code base, you're going to increase the carbon impact of what happens. Now, poll number 2 is, do you know what powers your dam's data center? So when you bought a dam, did you have a conversation, for example, with your dam vendor about whether they are on Amazon, AWS cloud, or whether they're on, Azure, Microsoft Azure, whether the data center is local, whether it uses solar power, wind power? Did you have any of that conversation? Okay, we've got some answers coming in. So far, almost 90% have no idea whatsoever. Not surprising there. Good old-fashioned fossil fuels, 10%. Okay, people know that. 13%, 7%. Okay. So this is an important. This is probably if not the biggest topic and the biggest elephant in the IT industry in terms of the elephant in the room. It's the carbon impact of data centers. And I've just finished a course with the University of Oxford, and it's been very enlightening. It was an 8-week course specifically on the future of sustainable business, and I did my project on sustainable data centers and how they operate. Apparently, we have somebody who has a solar-powered data center. That is awesome. That's great. Very good. That could be 2 people. Amazing. So this is good. Most people don't know, but at least there's some awareness here. So that's good. All right, so let's talk about data centers. Data centers have a massive carbon impact, as I mentioned, AI, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I did a lot of research on this over the last few months, and this is an example from Rolls-Royce, which I thought was really cool. I mean, there's amazing examples of data centers, sustainable data centers from all the big tech companies, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of how they work. But when you invest in a software as a service vendor, you might actually, if you're not thinking about this now, you need to think about this in the future. And I'll tell you why. Because especially if you're in Europe, the European Union has requirements now and is starting to pass laws around carbon emissions. And if you are going to buy from a supplier, if you are a European government agency, you actually have to ask them these things. You have to know these things. So this was my first year that I ever had a client actually ask dam suppliers to hand over their sustainability strategy, to hand over information about their data center, to understand how their data center was powered, with what kind of fuel, with what kind of energy. And this was a European public entity, and they sent the RFP to 7. This was a request for proposal because they were picking a new dam, and they sent it to 7 different vendors. And I'll tell you that all of the policies were very obviously sort of thrown together, very haphazard. Most of them were 1 page, and most of them just reprinted whatever the big tech companies' sustainability policy was. So if they worked with AWS, it was Amazon's. If they worked with Microsoft, they reprinted the Microsoft Data Center, Azure environmental and energy policy. So it was quite clear that dam vendors weren't thinking about this enough. So if you're a dam vendor on this call, you should be thinking about this more, because especially if you want to work with European government agencies, which actually care about the suppliers they're buying from. And this is also big with investors. I work with a lot of PE investors and mergers and acquisitions that look at companies in the space. And now they have their sustainability often leads, and some of them even have chief sustainability officers that are looking across an entire portfolio of companies, and they want to know, well, how are these companies actually fueling what they host, right? And so the software that they host, the data that they host, and that's become a requirement for even getting investment. So if you are going for a Series B or C funding, you're probably going to need this information in order to actually report it to your investors. So this model shows you how a sort of circular model for data centers works. So circular models or sustainable business models, they specifically, of course, use their own waste. If you're not familiar with how circular the circular economy or how circular anything works, I highly recommend you read about it. But it's ideally a zero waste game here, where the carbon that is generated by the data center gets stored or used immediately. So this is kind of a mixed model here. Okay, so this mixed model is showing a data center with fuel cells. Hydrogen is another, of course, way of storing fuel. You've got wind, and it's putting, of course, wind and solar energy here as an example. And it's a circular model where it's not only powering the data center itself, so the idea of the data center using its own heat and waste to generate more power, but also ideally putting any excess power into a public power supply. So there's a lot of discussion right now, which gets me really excited about this technology, to actually use data centers to power cities, whole cities. So Frankfurt, which is the European capital of data centers, pretty much there, and Amsterdam are the two biggest hubs. They're saying that Frankfurt could be completely powered by data center heat by 2030, right? So that's only 5 years away, and this would be remarkable, wouldn't it? I mean, it would just be awesome. So some of these circular data centers, they follow certain principles, and this is part of what you might want to talk about with your dam vendor, because frankly, when they come up for renewal, your procurement team, your purchasing team might have to ask about this, because investors are asking about this, and it's going all the way up now to the C-level, where all sorts of companies of all sizes are getting pressure to be more sustainable. And if you can actually tell a sustainable tech story, you're going to be pretty unusual, and you're going to be pretty much in the forefront. So as I spoke about, using low carbon and renewable energy, so many of the big tech firms, Google, Microsoft, etc., they're generally starting here. They're using solar or they're using wind energy, but very few of them are actually using their own waste. They're not necessarily they're not completely circular and using their own heat to sort of repower and be totally circular. But all these other items that I've touched on already, and one of the most interesting uses of AI that's in the energy industry right now is also AI analyzing how much heat is getting generated, how the cooling can be more efficient, but then also AI actually measuring how much of this can we store, if we were to actually do this completely circularly. So it's a very exciting space, and really interesting. It's been really interesting for me to study it. So big tech is already on this path. So I'll use Google as an example. If you host with Google, this is good to know. We could do this poll question again at the end if you know about what powers your data center. Google committed to being carbon neutral in 2007. So carbon neutral you can achieve by buying offsets, right? So you're still creating all these emissions, but maybe you're planting enough trees to offset your emissions, right? That's not ideal because, of course, you're still creating all those emissions. Since 2017, they have used completely renewable energy for their data centers. So this is great, right? They match the global annual electricity use with wind and solar purchases. Some facilities, so I shouldn't say they met all, some of their facilities still rely on carbon-based power in some places, but the fact that they are at least buying as much renewable energy, and they're looking to transition completely by 2030. So this is a pretty typical story. Now, what's been concerning is that these commitments generally were made before the massive impact of AI that's happened over the last 18 months to 2 years. Now, Microsoft, they didn't just aim for carbon neutrality. They actually aimed to be carbon negative by 2030. And they committed to offsetting all the carbon they've emitted in their entire history since they've existed by 2050. So in addition to being carbon neutral within the next 5 years, they're continuing to do carbon offsets on the basis of everything they've ever emitted. Now, that commitment was made a few years ago, and if you read the press now, what's interesting is that AI has put all this in jeopardy because of the fact that emissions are going up so fast. And there are many, unfortunately, C-level people at big tech firms that have been interviewed and even saying, you know what, it doesn't matter. We're not going to reach our climate goals. It's all for naught. Let's just keep building data centers. And they just dismiss it. And of course, this is only going to get worse in what I will call the increasingly right political environment. And I won't go any further on politics, but this is obviously there's less of a commitment to doing the climate friendly thing, and there's more of a commitment to just generating more, right? So this is going to be a battle in government. It's going to be a government and policy, battle in policy. It's going to be a battle in law. And these big tech companies are rich because we buy from them, right? And we use their services. And so we as consumers, we as companies, we have the power to change this. So make sure that your procurement department is thinking about this and knows about this. So I'll talk about a few more things. This is exciting. It's exciting, but it's not high enough, right? So this is some stats about who's actually thinking about buying renewable energy. And this is corporations, not the big tech firms. This is just a broad, corporate evaluation, 12-month plan, 3-year plan. So there's 25% of companies doing this now, but, it's still not adding up to 100, is it? 48% still not looking to renewable energy. So, be a champion for the planet and get your procurement team on this. One of my favorite stats here is this one. Renewable resources help with my brand image and for my company data center. A lot of people care about this because of their brand. I was talking to someone yesterday who works, she's preparing an Earth Day for a big Earth Day celebration for a big media company. Of course, Earth Day is in April, but she's preparing it now. And she said the CEO wants to helicopter into a rainforest and film himself talking about how important the planet is in the middle of a rainforest. But are they actually doing anything to help the planet? Questionable, isn't it? So this here is, I think, epitomizes the state that we're in, is that people think it's going to help their brand. And so they're doing a lot for their image. They're saying things, they're doing a lot of greenwashing, but they're not necessarily actually doing the real work required. So some interesting stats there. Sustainability is changing our industry. Those of us who work in media and technology. This is actually more recent from Deloitte. This is the stat I love here. 46% of companies are requiring suppliers and business partners to meet specific sustainability criteria. So like I mentioned, that's that anecdote / case study that I mentioned of this client that I had this year who required their vendors to meet sustainability criteria in order to be selected. So you can't avoid this anymore. I think especially if you're in Europe. Amazon's taking over another sector. We think about when we first started buying from Amazon, at least when I started first buying from Amazon 15 years ago, it used to come via UPS delivery or Federal Express or the mail service or whatever it is, and now they deliver everything themselves, right? So they've taken over delivery services. They're doing the same thing with the energy sector, right? It's the same thing. So these are some quick screenshots that I added to this presentation. I admit last minute, you can see they're from my phone. And I was talking to my brother who's, he works for, Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania. He works on the clean energy initiatives for the state of Pennsylvania, which is a very big state. And it has, a lot of, old power plants, and it has a lot of road infrastructure. And look at this, Amazon is now buying old power plants and old nuclear reactors. And why are they doing that? Because they want to do with the energy sector exactly what they've done with the delivery sector. They want to buy it up themselves and they want to take it over. And of course, exactly what I talked about, that circular model for energy, right? They want to be able to store the energy themselves. They want to be able to use it for their own data centers. And if they have any extra energy, guess what they could do? They could sell it, right? It's another way for them to make money. So it's a very interesting development as well. Amazon is not just the everything store. They're going to be the everything, if they keep doing stuff like this. Few takeaways in the last couple of minutes that I have here, and what should you do? What should companies do, and how should you champion the planet when it comes to technology? So I think the most obvious thing I said was, work with your company and your procurement people, to think about where's my data center, what energy is it using, and are we actually working with a DAM vendor? Because DAM vendors generally, very few of them are still doing their own storage. Some of them have local data centers themselves, but very few. Most of them are working with Google and Microsoft and Amazon, et cetera, to do their storage. So can you actually require them to use renewable energy for where your dam is living? So this is probably number one. But also there's things related to dam that have to do with devices. Does your company have a sustainable device management policy? Do they recycle? Do they invest in carbon offset programs? And there's all kinds of sustainability certifications now. And I'm seeing some of my clients have people on their IT team, think about optimizing code, for example, for energy efficiency and green data centers and things like that. And I could talk a lot about edge computing, which is a fascinating thing to read about as part of this. But this is a way to essentially do processing closer to where you are to get more immediate results. And so there's not so much going over the transom, reduces energy consumption, reduces waste, and actually offloads some work from the cloud, which lowers resource consumption. So that's a good thing. A few graphics here, one from Sangfor Technology, an interesting article I read yesterday about NVIDIA's new AI chip. I thought this was amazing. This computer chip features over 400 billion transistors. 400 billion. I mean, think about that. It's like your brain can't even compute that, right? Can train artificial intelligence models, but it is yet to reveal a price tag. It uses less energy. So I was happy that was in the it was in the subhead, right? Of course, everyone's excited that it's the most powerful and it's a super chip, but even NVIDIA, the most valuable company in the world now, realizes that this is really important. So be thinking about this and think about maybe taking these sustainable computing elements to your CTO if he's not thinking about it already. And then what can you do as an individual? And then I'll be happy to wrap up, take some questions. Choose some energy efficient devices, yourself on a day-to-day basis. Turn things off occasionally. I know at least I used to leave my computer on even when I went on vacation, but now I turn things off. Don't keep things streaming, even with your DAM. Don't just constantly be creating more versions of things. Be efficient. Delete old things. Archive things. Compress files. Archives take up much less storage. So if you have a whole bunch of files in your DAM that haven't been touched for over a year, you can compress them, cold storage, etc. That'll take up less carbon imprint. Think about your own device settings. Energy saving device settings. I did this probably sometime over the summer. I went through all my devices and put on energy saving mode, things like that. Unplug your chargers. These are all just sort of basic things. These should be like brushing your teeth, So think about decreasing your use of energy every day. And if you're one of those 48% of the people who take pictures of your food, you really don't need to take pictures of your food. I stopped taking pictures of my food now. So there we go. I hope you found this interesting. There's a lot more further reading on this topic. As I mentioned, I just took a course with the University of Oxford and did a ton of research on this topic. So if you have interest in reading about this further, please just send me an email. I will send you this with the links. Here's my email address, teresa.regli@voxveritasdigital.com. And I'll be happy to send you this. I think it's really fascinating stuff. And I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. A couple of questions that we do have out there. Earlier, you had some figures that were identified about carbon emission figures. Can you state where those figures are from?
Yes, it was on the slide. Hold on. I need to go back.
Print that none of us could read.
I had so many sources for this. For the research I was doing over the last 6 months, and it's been very intense. So there's 3 sources for that slide where I have the carbon imprint. It's myclimate.org, ResearchGate, which is a very big research firm, and NetZero. So I know NetZero is the graphic with the countries and the emissions of the data centers. The airline emission one is from myclimate.org, and it's interesting because that is the lowest one I found, the 2.3 to 3.7. I actually found some that estimate that the emissions from digital is actually higher than airlines already. So different studies, different. So it's on the slide there. It's those three: myclimate.org, ResearchGate, and NetZero.
Excellent. And this will be available, the recording will be available. You'll be able to take a look at that. You'll be able to look at the deck to get further information. Also, some of the readings that you've put there. And I believe the decks will also be available to you, so we can kind of click through. I think you have some click through on those specific research items. Excellent. Another question that came in, first a little description of Cara stated, understanding on the topic is that a data center that is connected to the power grid cannot source its energy from a specific source, example, solar. It gets its energy from the grid where all sources are pulled.
Yeah.
So it is hard for a data center to be solely powered by renewable sources. Is this correct, or can you comment further on that?
I am not an energy expert yet. So based on what I've seen, it's exactly right. It goes into a grid. Well, that was like the Rolls-Royce. That was the Rolls-Royce image, right? So the power was coming from the renewable energy. It was going towards the grid. And then some of it was going into the hydrogen storage. Some of it was going into the fuel cells. And then it was powering the data center. So that was probably the best example that I showed. Like I said, I'm definitely not an energy expert. I've only been looking at this space for about 3 months. But it couldn't be, there has to be some intermediary spots, of course. And that grid, powering that grid by renewable energy is still something that you can ask your supplier, right? So if they buy from a certain grid, they should be able to tell you how that grid is powered, right? Whether it's solar or wind and this is part of what I find so interesting about Amazon buying up, the old nuclear reactors is that, they're going to own more of that supply chain, essentially the energy supply chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of the same supply chain. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Theresa.
Thank
I think
you.
that's our questions here.
Yeah.
Next up is dam governance in an artificially intelligent future with Elizabeth Fletcher. So we look forward to having you all at the next one. Again, Theresa, it's wonderful to see you here. And great to be on the stage with you again. And hope everyone has enjoyed this presentation. There will be a recording and availability for you to access the information that you've seen here today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
And see you at the next session. Thank you.